January 6th, 2021, 6 p.m. meeting. I'm going to start with a roll call. Jim Danhauser,
Here.
Tom Hoppenstedt, Dom,
Here.
DJ McKinnon,
Here.
Ron Mycock,
Here.
Ray Perone, Ray's here.
Yeah, he's here. He's muted.
Adam,
Present.
and we have a new member, Mr. Mark Lynch. I asked him to join the committee. Lives in Cotuit, obviously, and he's a retired attorney. I think we can use all of his skills on our committee.
Here.
So everybody
Welcome,
get a
Mark.
chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Yep.
Any changes, corrections?
I move we approve.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. So this evening, we're going to discuss some of the options for the use of the Cotuit School. So I'm going to start with the chief. He's arranged a talk to show you the possibilities if the building is converted into a fire station and district offices. You should have been received the information from the chief that showed some sketches of the building. And so Chief, why don't you take over?
All right, so we've got some facilities needs for the district. The fire station, we did a needs analysis over the last 6 months and identified space requirements, facility requirements that we need to meet standards. The same exists with the water department. Prudential and Treasurer doesn't have any space at this point in time. So we have facilities needs, whether we use the school to satisfy those or some other option. That's kind of what I tried to prepare to give you options on which one is most cost effective and more desirable for the district. So what we did is we met with water department, Prudential, Treasurer, and went through the school and talked about how our needs could be satisfied at that facility. And with those needs, we drew up an AutoCAD drawing to scale showing how district needs would fit in. And it turns out that it occupies about 13,000 square feet of the building, of the almost about 19,000 square feet, and fits very well and leaves the gymnasium and the 2 front offices open with the 2 public bathrooms. So it leaves public space, public community space, along with the district space. I can answer questions about the drawing or put it up on the screen, the floor plan. I've also invited an architect from Kessel Bose. Todd Costa, he's on the screen right now. They're designed pretty much all the fire stations that I'm familiar with, recent builds. They've done public buildings all over the state. They've got a lot of experience. I worked with them on the fire station on Nantucket. They did Chatham, they've done Sandwich Police, Sandwich Fire, Harwich. Trying to think of the other ones. They've done stations all over the place. So he's looked, I believe he's had a chance to look at the floor plan that we came up with. I believe he's probably had a chance to review the 111-page assessment the town had done of the structure, and maybe is able to comment a little better on the numbers that we've been kind of throwing around and let us know whether they're reasonable or just some budgetary numbers to make decisions with. So what do you want to do? You want to hear from the architect first? Well, we have him on the line, or what works for you, Fran?
I think that would be, so we don't keep him too long. Why don't we hear from him first?
I appreciate that. I'm used to these night meetings, and I appreciate the chief inviting me, and as well as the rest of the committee. So I won't take a lot of your time. The chief has kind of been asking me questions about, process, feasibility, things of that nature. So to kind of go into that, and without getting, although I appreciate the chief's insight that getting through a 100-page document is a little bit of a challenge. I'm not quite all the way through, maybe about halfway. A lot to digest. But the essence of it is, yes, this is one of the things that's all that I do is public safety within Castle Booze. And I'll try not to do a lot of discussion about our company, it's a specific company, but hopefully kind of give some insight about the process you may want to undertake to look at this. So in essence, the market right now is favorable for construction, municipal construction in the Commonwealth. The downturn of the economy, the pandemic, if you would, has been very favorable for construction numbers. So it is a good time to look at this. It is also a little bit dicey to be able to predict where it's going to go in the future, even within the next year. So I will do my best in kind of providing some level of guidance as kind of a ballpark in that aspect. So I guess the first aspect is, the school building. It is older. A few concerns that we end up having is public safety is a little bit of what we call a high risk structural consideration or an essential facility. So that's one of the first things that we would want to look at, or I should say you should want to look at and identify as to whether or not there is any, when it was built, and again, through dialogue with the chief, I think there was a structural engineer that looked at it, seems to believe that there's not much, if anything, that needs to be done structurally there, but we would want somebody, again, you would want to have somebody look at this from the eyes of somebody who's used to doing fire stations, public safety facilities, to make sure that school building is going to be viable for a fire facility, an essential facility again. So that's kind of number one thing. The often what is done is initial feasibility study is the first step. The chief indicated that he's already kind of done an internal needs assessment, a programming assessment, which is a good baseline, identified the need. The next from there would be to bring in an outside consultant. We specialize in that, but we also work with an individual who has done hundreds of fire stations from as far south as Florida, as far north as Alaska, and that's all that his company specializes in. So he stays up to speed on the latest trends in fire service and protecting firefighters. That'll give a little bit more insight as to the building program and what we're going to be able to fit in there. In essence, so that's kind of would be step one, I guess. If I remember correctly, that's what we had talked about, right, Chief? Is get the feasibility study, make sure that the building is conducive for this building type. Step two in that would be basically, in that feasibility study, not only would it give you a program, it would give you an overall conceptual design as to how those spaces would arrange and interact together. And then it should also include an estimate. So the estimate should be inclusive. And what I mean by inclusive, it should give you the construction cost, what we call the bricks and mortars, what it's going to cost to renovate the building. It should give you the equipping costs, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment that go into the building, as well as specialty equipment for the fire department, if anything needs to be purchased there, any loose equipment, networking equipment, computer equipment, communications, whether or not there's any communications infrastructure, radios, things of that nature that are going to need to be improved as part of this project. consoles if there's a dispatch, and then security and access control numbers. All these, what we call that like I said, FF&E or equipping costs. That's the best analogy I can give, is that's the stuff that if you could pick the building up and shake it, is going to fall out of your building. And that is a separate number. Also inclusive in that should be in what we call the indirect costs, which is the architectural engineering fees for our, what would be our team and all of our consultants or whoever you decided to hire. Should be a consideration of an owner's project manager. Anytime you get to a project that's
1.2 million.
Thank you, Chief. Too many numbers rattling around after today, but anything that's 1.2 million and above,
I'm
you're
sorry,
supposed,
1.5. That's my mistake.
you're supposed to hire a independent owner's rep. They should be, and the state basically says they should be on as early as schematic design. So you can do a feasibility study without an OPM, but as soon as you get ready to cross that line into the next stage of design documents, you want to bring, a solicit for an OPM and bring them on board. They would basically be as a committee, your eyes, ears, and watchdog of who's doing what, and making sure that everything that's needs to be thought about, from utility companies to interaction with adjacent buildings or adjacent organizations. All of that starts they're kind of one of the conductors, if you would, of that, everything that's going on, and making sure everybody's hitting the right points and hitting the milestones so that you get out to bid in as efficient as a time as possible. You also want to include things, and this is something that a lot of architects forget about, is utility back charges and moving costs, reproduction costs, any potential legal fees, because you will want your counsel to review documents for procurement, as well as anything that may come up, bid protest or whatnot. And then in alongside of all of that, you should have contingencies. Nobody is, like I said in the beginning of the conversation, I'd love to be able to predict the future of what's going on with market adjustments. So there is what's called construction contingency, which anticipates any unforeseen wants or desires of the department. Once you get into a condition with a renovation, you want those a little bit higher, because there's going to be, as you open up walls or remove ceilings, there's going to be surprises, sins of the past that are going to kind of poke their heads up. We like to carry a equipping contingency and an indirect cost contingency for something that may come up, whether it be hazardous materials, asbestos, things of that nature.
And could you give us an estimate of what you think total contingencies in a budget ought to be in percentage terms?
So construction contingency industry standard, and that is just purely on the bricks and mortar of the building, is about 5%. And that is kind of the
5% of what?
5% of the construction cost.
Okay.
And construction cost is right now, for a renovation project, we're looking anywhere between $500 to $515 a square foot for a fire station. Those are, so I'll throw a lot of numbers out at you, and I apologize. Feel free to ask any questions. So the construction costs typically would be between 5 to 515. We consider about a 4% escalation per year for every year that goes by. And the challenging thing on that is it's compounded. So it's, if you're going out 1 year, it's 4%. You get that number, then the next year is another 4% on top of all of that.
And that 5% contingency is on that total number?
Yes.
Including the escalations?
Including the escalation, because the escalation is trying to anticipate material costs, labor costs.
Right.
Mostly it's material and labor costs of putting the building together. And that construction contingency is for any unforeseens in that. The equipment contingency that I mentioned is a little bit lighter.
Hey,
Sure.
Todd, can I ask questions before we get on to that so people have some clarity on it? So two things. One is the construction cost contingency. That wouldn't be something that you'd be able to hit with that level of reliability based on just a phase one study. I mean, the phase one study, although you'd have a construction cost associated with that, you don't have any design documents at that point. So the contingency that you're talking about is typically, you know, once you've got, you know, further along in the design and you're able to put a lot more definition on that cost is, or if you could just clarify that when.
Clarify that, absolutely. So
Yeah,
what
because
is,
the phase one construction cost is a good estimate, but
Mhm.
there's not a lot that goes behind that from a design standpoint.
no, and that's, you bring up a good point. You want to make sure that your design team has a qualified estimator. Somebody who knows the building type, knows the market. It's not a local. We've run into some of these things in the past where somebody who's familiar with residential construction is throws out a number of, you know, oh, it's $150 a square foot. And I'm just not saying that's it, but just, this is some of the conversations that I've had in the past. It's $150 a square foot. And, you know, this building's going to cost you X million dollars. That's great. That's for a house. And some people like to consider a fire station as a house attached to an oversized garage. That's not that was years ago what it was. The reality of it is it's a much different animal now. It's a business and there are lots of safety issues that need to be considered. So that our numbers, when we set a baseline number, so as you had mentioned, is it McKinnon?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. McKinnon, when you mentioned that phase one number, once we establish a hard number, if you would, that's bought into by the community at large, that's the number that we live and die by. And we work materials and the building and the plan to meet that number. So if at phase one, we say it's X number of millions of dollars to do this project, and that's a total buy-in of that's what we're going to do, that's what we live and die by. Sometimes with the market, we don't like to come back and ask for more. We realize that, and in the scenario that I'm going to map out based on the discussions with Chief Rude, is probably the best case scenario you could have. It's the least amount of risk, if you would. But there is often, after a feasibility study, after a phase one study, a lot of communities do say, okay, this is what the money that we're going to borrow, and this is it. This is a hard number. So it's a $10, $15 million project. That's the number we have to work with. And where, you know, from pencil to ribbon cutting, that's it. That includes the contingencies. Like I was saying, we set those contingencies as early as possible, and we try and hold that number and not break into it. So for a renovation project, if we set a 7% contingency, because that's a good value for a renovation, you know, whatever that dollar value is, we're going to hold that 7% and not, we kind of look at it as this piggy bank that's sitting over here. It's to take care of, in another conversation that, you know, you'll want to have is, construction documents are not perfect. They're built by humans. They're assembled by humans. We'd love for them to be as near perfect as possible, but there will be things that are missed, oversights, and especially, like I said, in a renovation project, that there will be things that are going to have to be paid for out of that contingency line item to make sure that they get into the project or they get it addressed. Like I said, opening up some of those walls and finding sins. There's sometimes even within the documents, an electrical engineer and a plumbing engineer don't necessarily at the last minute make a contact between a couple of electrical ties. Those things do happen. They do occur. So some of that money will get chewed into, but ultimately, if you have a $150,000 contingency to the side, and again, just using numbers for numbers sake, in theory, you could hand $150,000 back to the community in the end of the project if it was a perfect project.
Is
And then one other question, just so that, because you mentioned the number, and I just want people to understand the framework of it. You mentioned the 500, 515 a square foot. Is that typically for your new construction? Because I assume every renovation project is specific to whatever it is you're renovating.
It is, you do bring up a very good point with that. It is very specific to what you're renovating. So if you were a 1930s school, you may be closer to the 515. A brand new fire station project is going to be closer to $600 a square foot. Because if you've got good bones and you've got good exterior wall, we're not talking about putting all of that work and effort into on-site labor to enclose the building. This is where a contractor, and a good contractor, is going to fall in love with your project, because the ever so problematic term of winter conditions is taken off of the table with the contractor. They don't have to worry about casting concrete in 32-degree weather and putting blankets on it and making sure the ground doesn't freeze in and around your foundation. So you get a good pool of contractors that are going to be very eager to bid that type of project where we're talking about a renovation.
Okay.
Hey, Todd, just to back up 1 minute, have you had a chance to look at the budgetary Excel spreadsheet that we came up with? I think that, see. So what we did, we've talked to 2 architects, yourself, another architect. We've talked to 2 structural engineers. We're trying to come up with decision-making documents for this committee to decide whether they're going to go or the next step, which would be feasibility, design analysis, which is the rough cost to bring to the public and see if they want to go further to the next step. So what we try to do is come up with some rough costs, and what we're throwing numbers out there, and I know they're really rough numbers. I have to talk to some engineers and some architects of $500,000 for design, and we put 5 million down there for construction costs. And we use those numbers to come up with some impact on the tax rate for the committee to make decisions on whether this is worth taking in the next step. And like you said, the next step would be to hire a consultant or a contractor designer to come in, do the programming analysis, and come up with some more defined numbers that we can take to the tax base and ask for design to bid funds, which is $500,000. Now, I think what we've done so far is partially the programming and some of the collective information, which is part of that feasibility analysis. So I feel like we're partway there. But right now, the sheet we have, are those reasonable numbers to make a decision whether we go to the next step type of numbers?
The only challenge I would have with that is, and again, this is where I wanted to speak to my estimator, that $500 a square foot is a construction number only, that's not including equipping your space. And again, we've touched lightly on all of the aspects in our conversations, Chief, without diving into any major details. I don't know if you have certain equipment that is got good life still in it that would be brought over. So as taking a kind of a broad brush approach.
Right. We don't have a lot of equipment. So on a fire station, for our facilities and our needs, our Scott our air compressor for our air packs has got plenty of life left. We really don't have much equipment. We've got extractors for our gear cleaning. We probably need a dryer, which is a couple $1,000s. We don't have a lot of stuff we would need to buy to put it in the station. There's not a lot of soft costs or equipment costs for us. This is mainly a office type setup. Yeah.
So that 500, that 5 million might be a little light based on just being.
Yeah, Chief, just taking the 13,515 and adding 7%, and that doesn't include the contingencies for equipment and indirect costs that Tom was talking about. You're up over just a little over 7 million.
Right. So I guess that's the conversation, is we need to have, some numbers to make a decision whether we go to the next step. And Um,
Right, and that didn't include, that number doesn't include the feasibility studies, ready risk assessment work, any of the design stuff.
or any other work that has to be done for the other space besides the fire station,
Right.
if any.
Well, is that just the 13, did you say 13,000 square feet of the full?
Yeah, I just took 13,000 times 515,
Okay.
added 7% to that.
And I will say some of the other spaces, based on the conversation with Chief, was what, the water department and the district offices?
Yes.
Right. With the 13,000 square feet is what the district space would encompass. And one of those is a classroom that already exists. That's, I don't know how many, what is that? That's probably 1,000 square feet. There's an apparatus bay that would be built, which I know the cost for that is not as high as other, space to be produced. That's about, I think that's about 5,000 square feet of apparatus bay. So you're ending up with about another 6,000 square feet of office living space. And then the remaining space, the other 6,000 remaining space in the facility is a gymnasium and 2 existing offices that would be community space, which would need little renovation.
Okay. Yeah,
So the number only goes up.
it will, but it won't. And here's the
Right. It won't go up like,
I'm giving you broad brush numbers for a fire station, but the more of that generic, and I use the term generic loosely. I mean, we look at it as it's a basic business. You're going to have some networking. You're going to have, it's not as intricate as a fire station. So you're not talking at $500 a square foot there. You're talking a little bit lower.
The other thing to put in perspective, just to throw out another number, if you go through this big report that the town did, which I went through it, I actually thought it was pretty well done. And essentially the premise of that was if we took this school, did all the repairs, all the upgrade to essentially get it, towards the school, which was what it was original intended use, their total cost is about $250 a square foot. So again, that is just repurposing it as a school, but it maybe gives a little bit better sense of taking existing spaces and just utilizing them more for the original purpose they were built. Now, again, 250 is probably something people would have to take a little bit more careful look at, but I thought they did a pretty good job in this report. So that, and it was really why when the initial number of 500 or 515 a foot was kind of thrown out, I was just trying to put some real caution on it that we're at a very early stage now. Maybe it's a good number, maybe it's high, maybe it's low. I don't know.
yeah. So DJ, what I think you're saying is that number doesn't necessarily apply to the entire square footage. Tom, you were saying this too. So, however, I do think the $5 million number might be, well intended, of course, Paul, but it might be a little light.
Like I said, I've talked to a couple engineers and architects. We're working to try to get close, but to really get a better number, we need to go to the next step, which is to appropriate money to have a real feasibility study done. So the purpose of this document and the work so far was to make a decision and whether it's worth to go to the next step. And the next step, as Todd said, would be to have a feasibility study done. And that could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months is my kind of guess. We could probably try to rush it, but my guess is it's probably taking closer to the 6 month time frame. So,
And Paul, is that the $10,000 number you have in your chart?
It could be anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000. So I think I threw $10,000 in there, and that was more to do more of just a structural type analysis and not as in detail. I talked to Todd. What do you think, Todd? What would we really be looking at for given what we've done so far, to go the rest of the way and come up with a number? Obviously, we have to go to bid for it. What do you think we should be appropriating to get us to a legitimate number that we can bring to the taxpayers and say, listen, we recommend this project or we don't, and this is what the ultimate cost realistically should be. And we're looking for, the design to bid money now.
Just refresh my memory, Chief. You said May, right?
So
the district meeting.
So I think the committee here is looking to probably get control over the property earlier than that, possibly.
Okay.
And at that point, they might be able to appropriate money for a study. The district meetings in May, I think the documents that I circulated proposed a possibility of completing a feasibility study by May. That's probably overly ambitious, and I think more than likely we probably need like probably 6 months to do a real. I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to go in front of the taxpayers and say, we rushed through and got a number and didn't do enough public education and outreach to really do it right.
It's open to, I'd love to say it's impossible. We've just done 2 feasibility studies for fairly large facilities in 3 months time frame, 2 years back to back. It's not impossible if you've got the right team in place.
And how much? What's the cost? What did you get paid for those?
Those, I think it was 120 for one of them.
So
And
we were looking at 120,000 for a feasibility study for a renovation.
it was an all new. Both of them were all new, and they're very, very consolidated timeline. 40 would be doable.
Okay.
And within a 6 month, 40 to 60 would be very doable to do a full feasibility study.
All right. And then at the end of that, for that $40,000, we get a report that says this building is or is not capable of supporting what we want. This is what the ultimate cost will most likely be. And this is how much money you need for engineering to get you there. Is that?
That's exactly it. It basically would set out a roadmap of here's what the anticipated cost is. Here's how much time it's going to take to not only design it, here's how much time it will take to build it. And that's kind of all in the pricing aspect of things. And then it'll give you some concepts. Usually what we like to do is give you 3 conceptual layouts, get a preferred, and then develop that preferred into a marketing plan, if you would, or a marketing tool for you to go out to the community and sell the project.
One other question, Todd, if the village is looking at this and saying, over the next 20 years, we think our needs for, fire station for these other departments is could potentially be accommodated in this building. Is there a way as part of that study to also have another component of would say, if it's not done here to meet these needs in 20 years, if you did, new construction somewhere else, this is approximately the size. Maybe it's the same size, maybe it's a little bit more, a little less, because you might be able to do a little bit more efficient building, but say it would be approximately this size and approximately this cost. And then that way people can really see, what are the alternatives to meet the needs over the next 20 years. Obviously, there's a possibility this might be available and this might be a good alternative, but I think without having the opportunity to look at what it would cost if it was done somewhere else, it's hard for people to put it into perspective.
I was just going to say that, give them perspective, because what is it as a, here's what you're going to spend, $5-10 million, whatever it ends up being. Here's what you're going to spend now. Here's what you're going to spend if you wait 2, 3, 4 years, and now you're going to do it all new. And there's going to be a delta between that, and it's not going to be quite as appetizing. Because I can't tell you how many communities we've worked with and said, well, 3 years ago, we were talking about this station. It was going to be a $3 million station. And now all of a sudden we're at 6.
Yes.
It's amazing how quickly things have escalated, especially within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's primarily our work is within the Commonwealth.
I have a question. Would it be prudent as part of the feasibility study to look at our current fire station and determine what cost would be entailed for making that more usable and have larger and higher bays? Because I'm sure somebody's going to ask that question, why can't you just redo the existing fire station?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. And that can be done fairly quickly. Because one of the things to consider is, and we're doing this right now in the community in Needham, is, okay, if you want to renovate that station, your fire service and your EMS service can't go down. So now you've got to find a location to house this equipment on a temporary basis for a certain duration of time. And you don't want it to be a renovation in place because contractor's going to get in the way of responding vehicles and quality of life for the fire departments. And quality of life is I hate to say not is less important. It's going to become a clash, and get the fire department out of the building, off-site, operating from a temporary location. Here's the challenge. That can run you up to, for a 12-month time frame, $1 million easily in temporary quarters, temporary heat, and housing of the trucks for an entire year, especially within the environment. You can't leave the trucks out in the cold weather because they're filled with water. So it does become a challenge. We've seen numbers of even just for another type of public safety facility, a police station. We just finished the Orleans police station. And that was roughly for them to be in a temporary facilities for, I think it was 16 or 18 months. It was about $1 million for a temporary facility. And so that's kind of, there's no quantifiable, no substantial, tangible, thank you, that's the word I'm looking for, product for that money. So it does become a hard sell in the communities. We've done some, like I said, we're doing one right now in Needham. Their fire station 2 was best placed in the location it was at. It was just too small. Bays were too short, too shallow, and a few other challenges. And it had to be here. We just needed to freshen it up, is a bad term to use, but it was make it compliant to modern day standards. So that was a large chunk of time and effort and money went to building them a temporary facility, which is it's a large canvas tent for the apparatus and a bunch of trailers that were pulled to the site and connected to the tent with a heated tube tunnel, if you would. And
That would just mean that's just an added cost that we'd have to factor into the alternative that Fran pronounced, which is absolutely right. And I do think we need to have the ability to answer that question because Fran's right. People will ask.
Absolutely.
There's another wrinkle as well, from a water perspective, because this property is adjacent to one of our primary well pumping stations and storage tank facilities. And we have had consultants recommend that we construct and build and maintain water treatment facilities. Have you done any work like that, Todd, associated with a fire department as well? And also for Chief Rude, what sort of chemicals would be stored and possibly utilized on site for training that could potentially impact the water quality? I think that's something that would definitely come up in discussions with the district.
Want me to answer first?
Good, Chief. Good. I can talk for a while on that one. So.
Yeah, no, so, as far as us, the only chemicals we're going to use for training is water. Nothing else. No foam, no nothing. Modern fire stations all have containment systems for any drains within the station. So any washing of fire trucks is done inside. All the water is contained and shipped off site for proper disposal. It would have to have a new septic system. Obviously, it would be an alternative septic system, IA, with little to zero nitrogen. The water has to come first. That's everybody. I think it's acknowledged that water is the first priority. So no chemicals and zero impact, or significantly less than what currently has on site.
So if we were to have a treatment system constructed and we decided that was a good site to do that on, given the size of the property and its location in proximity to our tank and pump, that would actually help us out as a district, because any water that would have to be treated as part of training or capture could be done right on site.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you guys legitimately have a treatment center to build in the foreseeable future, that's probably something we should sit down with your designers too and go back to the drawing board and say, the outline, the layout that we came up with satisfies the fire department operational and office space, but if their district has other needs, then we really should consider all of them at the same time before we probably go any further.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree too.
But Tom, what is the status of that? I thought what you were saying at the last several meetings were that it might be needed sometime in the future, but it's not now.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct, Jim. And we did have recommendations from consultants saying, you got to start thinking about a treatment.
Oh, sure.
And we do have the PFAS substances in our water, and unfortunately, it's in every place we're looking at on Cape Cod. So it's not going to go away. And it's an activated carbon treatment system, which would serve the purpose of multiple treatment processes.
When you say at some point, is that 10 years, 5 years, 3 years,
No.
1.5 years?
We'd like to put it off. We'd like to deal with source remediation rather than treatment because of the economics of costs are so much more favorable if we can deal with sources. Unfortunately, with the PFAS, we can't really deal with sources because we're not really sure where it's coming from.
Well, one of the things we just heard from Todd was putting building off just increases the cost down the street. I think it would be a really good idea to try to hear from Todd about their experience on this. And if we wrap this all in a bow with, hey, water treatment, new location for the station, et cetera, whether that necessarily happens sort of in parallel, if you will, in terms of construction, but at least we have an understanding and perhaps even a commitment to go forward. Let's wave a magic wand and say that happens. I think we would be better served. We would be doing a better duty as a committee to include that due diligence now.
Yeah, I agree.
So interesting, and I haven't discussed this at all with the chief. This is something obviously I'm hearing new, but as a treatment plant, and I'm not familiar with, I'm out of my wheelhouse when we start talking about water treatment relative to drinking water, and water treatment in general. I shouldn't say just drinking water, but I have had some level of experience of water reclamation and water treatment. We applied for, and we got a little bit exposed to at the Southeast Regional Training Facility for the firefighters. Right, I actually live in Middleborough, so right next door in Bridgewater is where this is. And they wanted a design for a water treatment facility for their training water, so that they can, anything that they use within a burn building or on site goes into a drain, is collected, is treated, and departiculated, so it can go back through the pumps and not damage the pumps. So that's water treatment from a training aspect, which is a great selling feature back to the community. Not knowing how much area you might need, a consideration might be maybe for the department is, and this is something that is and a lot of our clients kind of toy around with, is they utilize a cost-effective construction methodology in this, is to build an outbuilding at a lesser cost. It's a tempered garage for vehicles that are not as frequently used for response. It could be, some communities put a brush breaker out there, some communities store a boat within that type of building, any number of things. But you could designate an area to the side of this. Again, it's a lesser cost than the main building. That would be for filtration. And then you have a storage area directly next to it. Now, as the chief has said, anytime we store vehicles inside, especially vehicles containing large quantities of water, we need floor drains to properly, sorry for background noise. We need to properly collect the runoff from the vehicles, snow, ice, rain, into a floor drain. And in the case of an area where we've definitely got water well structures, it's going to have to go into a tight tank. It has to go into a tight tank if we're on a septic system. So that will be collected and stored as the the chief has stated. Well, as far as training goes, we've done some light treatment and collection, if you would. A couple of communities that we worked with had the interest of showing a hand closer to being green. We actually collected the roof water, runoff from the roof, into drains, into a basin that had an overflow for, obviously, for larger rainstorms. But the department had a siphon that was built into that basin, and they were able to train off of that basin. And their training could actually refeed that basin, or it could be pumped and then let the roof refill it. I'll add some level of interesting costs to it, but it's part of the sustainable effort. And sometimes with just a little bit of thought, sustainability isn't more expensive. It's actually less expensive. It's how you approach it and how you want to implement it.
Yeah. Can I add a couple of comments? One is water treatment. We've done actually wastewater treatment plants, and water treatment is related to some of our bigger developments. I think from a planning standpoint, it usually, you're talking a building, you're talking a certain amount of land area, and that's part of the initial planning. But to take a step back, what's really driving a lot of the activity right now in this committee is that there's, the potential opportunity for a fairly large piece of land in the village with a structure on it. And part of the question is, does that meet the needs, potentially have the ability to meet certain needs of the village? If we take a couple of steps back, it seems like the physical needs are obviously related to fire, other physical needs for water, both office space as well as maybe the potential for a future treatment plant type structure, as well as some other kind of miscellaneous physical needs. Does it make more sense to be thinking about this as trying to come up with it's more of a capital planning and physical study of whether it's a 10-year period, 20-year period, 30-year period, but some horizon? How do we meet the needs of the village over this period of time? This potential opportunity for this piece of land with the structure on it, how could that potentially work? And really, if we don't do it here, how else could those be addressed? Whether it's a rehab of the fire station, whether it's a future water treatment plant somewhere else, but to really give the proper, and then it comes down to a decision. Does it make sense to spend some money today to do a much more in-depth analysis of this location and this building to see if it can meet the needs, what it would cost, and be able to compare that to doing it in other ways? So to me, I think what's driving a lot of this from a timing standpoint is this potential opportunity, which quite frankly, I think is pretty unique to be able to all of a sudden maybe have the opportunity to take over this substantial piece of land with a building on it. But I think if it doesn't make sense, or if it's not done, clearly the needs of the village, whether they're fire, whether they're water, whether it's a treatment plant, are going to have to be met somewhere at some point in time. And as opposed to them being forced based on certain circumstances at that point in time, and then having limited options available, whether it's the specific site or funds that are available, now's a real opportunity to do a long-term plan and see whether or not this location makes sense for it.
Well said, DJ.
I'd just like to say that I think the decision, we take the school. I think the decision at that point is, do we just let it sit? There's already been vandal damage to it. One window's been broken, or two windows have been broken. While we, look at long-term plans, the other option, is that, what are the carrying costs going to be for just taking over the building and owning it while we continue to, discuss possible future uses, which could take, years. The Hyannis Fire Department's experience with building their new station is I wouldn't be at all surprised for us to go through scenario similar to that, doing renovations on this building.
But
I think-
the other side of it is this, the structure, you know, it seems like the town's question is the village have a, you know, strong preference to take a look at this? So isn't a decision now with the town to basically go back to the town and say, would like time, we want to go to the village, ask for an appropriation of money to study this. And we're gonna need whatever it is, 6 months, maybe it's a year, to do a full in-depth study of everything, and say to the town, we want you to just hold on doing anything with the property. Essentially would like an option to take it over. We are willing to, you know, seek the funds to do this comprehensive study. And if it comes out the way we think it might come out, then would want to move forward and take the school. So with this first step, it's a matter of seeing if people want to appropriate the funds to do a full study and have the town essentially provide the time to do that study. And that hopefully would then give us all the information that people would need to see and understand, to then make a decision as to whether or not it makes sense to actually go ahead and take this property over.
I don't think we're talking a lot of time either. I think Todd said, you know, 3 to 6 months max. We could, for $40,000, have a study done that says, you know, what option makes sense, and, you know, what it's going to cost for that option. And our other option is to do nothing and like DJ said, wait and, you know, be forced upon us without an opportunity to have a free piece of land and possibly a free structure, which, you know, the per foot square cost for a new construction right now is around $650 a square foot. So we wouldn't have to pay for a community center then, but we may get a, you know, basically a new facility at a lower cost with a community center if we act now, if it works.
I think that, you know, that the overwhelming feeling of the people I've spoken with is that they want the village to be able to control this property. You know, I think that's a given. Then what we do with it after, you know, I think I don't think we have to decide right now. I think we need to, you know, have a meeting, and I've contacted Mark Boudreau just to get a ballpark of what any legal fees would be involved in the transfer of this property. So that, you know, we could tell that, you know, and maybe give them some ballpark ideas about, you know, renovating the building at that time. And we could ask for a feasibility study, but I think the most important thing to the village right now is getting physical control of that property.
Well, but we don't
To Fran's
know
point,
that the town would not be very happy to do something along the lines of what DJ suggested. Because, you know, the town is not necessarily eager to go, as long as there is a viable potential alternative, to spend $800,000 to tear the building down. You know, and yes, it's in the proposed capital improvement budget, but no one that I've spoken to has any reason to believe that that's going to take place before not this coming fiscal year, but the one after. So I do think we have some benefit of time. And to suggest to the town that it's not unreasonable that as a district, we believe we need to do some professional investigation of what the use of the building would be against what the needs of the district are likely to be. We also need to understand the costs involved in just taking over ownership and what that entails. And so as we're doing all of that work, we would like you to agree that you won't do anything with the building for a period of 9 months. I'd be surprised myself. I mean, who knows what the town would say, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't be very happy to know that we are maintaining a serious interest and actually spending some money to try to figure out what makes sense.
Jess, do you want to comment on that?
Well, no, not at this time, but Jim is absolutely right that it's rather doubtful that it will make the CIP in the next year or two, for that matter. So I think you're right. You do have some time. The concern, though, is a vacant building. And how long do we want to see that building remain vacant? Or can there be some interim activity? And I think the chief has indicated that perhaps doing some training up there as is in the building is a possibility, but that's yet to be determined.
Thanks. Any other comments, discussion?
We've talked about the tear down strategy for the town. Aren't there other alternatives that the town could avail themselves of, like selling the property sooner than the 2-year time frame?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, a letter indicating a possible, you know, transfer of the property should be, you know, put forward to the manager as soon as possible.
Mhm.
Which is not inconsistent with what DJ was suggesting either.
Correct.
I agree with
Mm.
DJ. I think it was a good suggestion.
I don't think that we necessarily have to worry about the May, annual, the ADM in May necessarily, but I do think that we, as a committee, should try to come to some consensus on whether we're actually going to undertake this kind of feasibility study relative to this unusual opportunity, as DJ mentioned. It doesn't seem a good idea to me for imagining years of status quo, because the needs for office space isn't going away. It's getting worse. The repairs to the fire station continue to rear their head, and then potential water treatment issues. And so I think we as a committee should feel comfortable that we're coming to consensus around doing this, meaning spending some money on what is this actually going to entail. We've done space studies in the past, and it'd be great to sort of put our arms around something that really could potentially mean something for 30 years for the district.
I have a question on how the committee thinks we'd approach this. Have we taken a turn, and are we just doing it in this direction? That is redoing the school building, or are we gonna also go in the direction of just getting the property and dealing with it?
I'm not sure I understand what that really means. Getting the property and doing what with it? What does that mean?
Just
I
going to
don't-
the town and saying, we'll take it.
Yeah, and then what?
Figure it out later.
So we just spend all money carrying it, and it doesn't seem. It seems silly to me to not have a plan that includes the potential non-use of this building, as DJ said. All these issues that we're wrestling with. It really look at sustainability over 30 years, a generation for this.
Also look the other way, because I think anybody I talk to, they want to make sure we have the land.
The what?
The land.
Land.
Land, L-A-N-D. They
Control of
want
the property.
it.
Yeah.
Whether there's a structure there or not to me is almost another question. I was always an advocate for a combined space like this for the district, but I think the opportunity, if from what I understand, somewhere 800,000-900,000, if we say to them, we'll take it and we'll deal with it. Well, is that worth it to us just to do that now and continue down the road with what you're talking about? That's where I'm going with it. I think,
I feel like we've already stated that to the town, and essentially that would be the that's the direction that we're moving in. That's already been agreed to. It feels like to me. Now we're talking about, are we going to actually enact, come to some consensus that we go to the rest of the citizens of the village and the district and say we actually have a plan for potentially using the land beyond letting it be fallow.
Well, I guess my question is to Ron's point. I do think this study is a good idea. On the other hand, if the study were to conclude that this property is not worthwhile being turned into a fire department and is perhaps not appropriate for whatever reason to be a water treatment plant, would we still want to have the property?
Well, I think what Ron and other people, and I agree that we would, but I want to go back to the point that DJ made about trying to broaden the nature of the study to say, hey, we're not just talking about this particular parcel of land in this building, but we really do need to think long-term about where might the water commission meet, potentially treat water, where would the fire station be, all those sorts of things. Because those issues I don't think are going, kicking them down the road, I don't think serves us well as a district.
No, that's.
No,
that's
I agree.
Those
I'm just,
no, those aren't mutually exclusive alternatives,
right.
right? Would be the point. You can, even if we were to say as a committee, you know what, we've investigated what it's going to cost the village to just own the building as it is today. Right? And we go to the village and say, we are prepared to recommend that we take over the building from the town, the building and the land, not including the fields and not including the tennis courts. But we'll have to come back to that in a second. But say that we're prepared to take it over. And if the worst case is we have to spend X thousands of dollars each year for security, and do something in the building from time to time, then that's what we have. And with that control, we can still do that full study that I think needs to be done as well to determine what's the right use of the building. But it does get us out of the position of just hoping that the town doesn't do something else with the building in the meanwhile.
Right. That's my point.
Let me try to clarify what I was saying. I am not at all suggesting that we have to do something tonight as a committee to make a decision around this. I'm saying that I feel that we should take it upon ourselves as members of the committee that this is something we do want to do, and or not. We should have a sense, perhaps tonight, whether, hey, we are going to do this. So I think I'm hearing everyone say that. I'm not saying at all that we need to vote, let's say, on entering into a contract to do a feasibility study tonight. It's just that I think taking on this building is going to. What I don't want to do is continue to have meetings where there isn't a sense of a plan, and that we're all in some kind of agreement and that we're working towards that. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I guess in order to be able as a committee to make sense of, would we actually want to tell the town we want the building and to take it over?
Well, if that's a result for tonight's meeting,
what that entails from a fiscal and legal perspective. What are the legal risks of ownership? And what are the fiscal responsibilities that come with ownership, assuming we do nothing to the building? And, we ought to, because that's going to be something I assume that people will want to get approved at a district meeting.
Sure.
And somebody sitting in the audience is rightly going to ask the question, okay, guys, you're recommending we take over ownership of the building. What does that mean on an annual cost basis? What does it mean from a legal risk perspective? Are there any? That those costs include security, maintenance, utilities, insurance.
Yep.
And is there any legal risk from an environmental perspective, including from the underground tanks? Those things would have to get investigated before we could, I would think, could recommend taking over ownership of the building.
Could we take ownership of the building at a special meeting, appropriate the money to do the study over the next 3 to 6 months? And at the end of the 3 to 6 months, either we recommend we go forward with a build for a district complex community center, or we recommend we go forward with a $800,000 tear down and
No,
maintain.
I think Jim was suggesting a different set of steps, Paul. It seemed to me that what I heard was, hey, what we need to do is put a much more clear picture together of what taking ownership of the parcel and the building today without a plan. So it's because we can't have a plan yet. So there has to be some clarity around what it costs to have that building in our possession.
Well, the costs are, if you keep the heat on and keep running everything, I think it's $40,000 a year. So we're talking 6 months to do a study, and then either it's a tear down or we're going forward to to solve district facility needs at hopefully at a lower cost than what the alternative would be.
So in a classic real estate transaction, the way you control the land without owning it is to put it under contract. So we could offer the town $1 to buy the structure in 18 months, or we could offer $1 to buy it in a year with 2 6-month extensions. That would at least control it from the perspective that they wouldn't be able to do anything else with it. And it would give us the time to do all of the necessary homework that we say we need to do. First and foremost, to me, as I look at what was sent out earlier in the week, the question is, where do we want the land divided? And the forested land that's there, I would like to see that protected to protect our well field. But if it's in the town's hands, there's no guarantee that it's going to be protected. Second, when I looked at the plan that you put together, what struck me first is that the area that's closest to the well is where the engines and the mechanical equipment would be, that would be, what's they say, of greatest danger to the well. And so someone earlier said, well, maybe we want to build a separate structure. And the best place to do it would be away from the existing structure, maybe out closer to Old Oyster Road. All of those things are possible considerations. And, you could tear down part of the building. I mean, as I was listening to this, I was also wondering, so how do you get under the brick building in order to be able to create those drainage areas? All these things need to be worked out. Let's figure out who has the authorization. Do we have to go to the district to sign to a district meeting to ask for authorization to put this under contract for $1 to buy it in 18 months or whatever?
Which is what TJ was suggesting. It's getting an option.
Yeah. So what do we have to do to get to that point? Because at least that puts it in a place where we're not going to get the rug pulled out from under us by the town, and lets the town know that we're really serious, and gives us, again, plenty of time to discuss with the community, and figure out what it is that we ultimately want to do.
Real quick before we start, can we let Todd Costa go? Is that all right?
Yes, thank you, Todd, very much.
Todd, thanks a bunch. It was very helpful.
My pleasure. Please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions or if something pops up.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Real quick, Jackie, I think it's a great idea, everything you said. The town, I've been talking to David Anthony, there may be the desire for the town to transfer all the property. So they may not object to giving us all of it and not just the land under the school. Just for conversation.
When you say all of the property, Paul, do you mean including all of the ball fields and the tennis courts?
Yes, I don't know if there's actually been an open meeting where this was discussed, but David seemed to think that was a legitimate, that they may be interested in allowing us to, as long as we maintained it, in its
Yeah.
current use, allow us to continue the maintenance and be responsible and ultimately have control, like Jackie said.
I have a problem with that. My Barnstable tax dollars are going to maintain the tennis courts and the ballpark, and they want a new playground installed. So I think just let the town, continue to pay for the maintenance of that and not, put it on the district taxpayers.
Well, the other option would be to make sure that it's all restricted so that it can't be developed in the future. I'm in conversations with Janet Milkman, who's the new executive director of the Land Trust. I think they would be willing to hold a conservation restriction. In terms of rebuilding the existing fields, you could certainly go to the town for Community Preservation Act funds to rebuild the fields, and you could actually put it on them to have it done before you took possession of the land itself, so that at least the fields came to the district, or the tennis courts or whatever came to the district in tip-top shape, so to speak. And all you would have is the long-term maintenance. I mean, you could also be talking to the Little League or whoever, or the Kettleers, or or any number of people who might be able to and willing. But the thing is about controlling it. And somebody talked about turning this into a community center. Is that the vision that we have for wanting a community center? We don't have one. Osterville's trying to get one. Centerville has one. Hyannis has one. We don't have one. And to your
West
point,
Barnstable has one.
yeah. So to your point,
Jackie, a
we've already
question.
taken care of
I
ourselves.
assume that we could just, in a negotiation with the town, they could undertake a development restriction themselves, right? In other words, put a covenant not to develop on those fields, and that would be enforceable.
Well, it would be better to have a third party hold the restriction. I mean, if the town transferred it to us, we could put the restriction on it.
Yeah, but
And
to Fran's point, we'd rather have them be responsible for the cost of maintaining the fields and the tennis courts.
in the long run, but again, in the short run, you could get money from the Community Preservation Act of the town to bring them up to snuff, so to speak. So again, the part of the question is, do we want to control the community structure, or do we not want to control the community structure? And does the community structure include the ball fields and the tennis court, basically? I mean, that's a small part of the costs.
Yeah, but in the future, somebody, on the Prudential Committee most likely is going to have to be responsible for maintaining and taking care of the ball fields and the tennis courts. And somebody has to be around to get called when there's a problem, up until now, if we take over this, it's been basically volunteer work to, take care of those sorts of things. But
We'd need to have a facility supervisor if we took that on.
yeah, definitely.
So you're saying we'd need somebody at the district level to be a maintenance supervisor, facility supervisor.
Right. And ditto if we, open up the school to the community, you're gonna need somebody to, we're gonna need our own new Buddy Martin, somebody to open and close the building, and somebody to maintain and, take care of the building, and not have it be an elected official responsibility.
Adam?
Thanks, Jim. So last meeting, we had an action item, which, writing the letter to the town indicating our interest. It sounds to me like a good action item out of this meeting might be that if we, a motion and a vote and everything, that we're saying that we want to initiate the process of presenting to the citizens that of the village and the district that we want to take ownership of the building and the part of the parcel that is currently, the 6 acres or whatever it is, I believe, and that's in the worst case scenario, or the best case scenario, I suppose, given all this, is that we're just going to own it and we'll knock the building down, and that's a $900,000 some odd potential cost to us. Is that what we're saying, or is that a reasonable achievement for tonight?
I'm not sure we would even have to to foot the full bill for the tear down. I mean, if
No,
we're
no, but it's a potential, it's a potential, you know,
calling the town and telling them we'll take the property, then they should give us some money to help tear it down.
yeah, no, Ron made that point last meeting. And I think that's great. It's just, what are we going to say to ourselves that we accomplished tonight?
It sounded reasonable to me to get back to DJ's suggestion. Let's see if we can get enough time to study it so that we may want to get the full analysis done that we talked about earlier. We might also want, and maybe
We're not.
that analysis could be the cost of just the maintenance and how can we cold store that building and preserve it. But the time, whatever it is, 9 months, a year, 18 months would give us some time to work.
But then, but we still wouldn't physically own the property after doing all of that.
No, but what Jackie's point was that we would get we would go to the town and negotiate for an option to buy the property. Which would give us control so that they can't sell it to somebody else.
It seems to me that the next step would be to talk with Mark Boudreau about how best to enter into these discussions.
Okay.
Certainly you'd want to do it within an executive session. You'd want to do it privately. You'd want your lawyer involved. And you'd want to negotiate for the smallest price for the longest period of time so that we could do what we needed to do.
Right.
And so perhaps what we should do is authorize a subgroup of the people that are here tonight to enter into discussions with Mark Boudreau about how to accomplish this. It may be possible for the Prudential Committee, for instance, to simply enter into a non-binding agreement. I have no idea. You know, it may be required that we have to go to the district for a vote to enter into that agreement. But so long as there's a way to get out of here and we've got nothing but $1 on the line or $100 on the line to do it, I'd put up the $100 on the line to get us the option to do it. It seems pretty easy, but we need some legal advice and guidance on how best to do that.
Ray, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think the only entity that can obligate the district is the district. I'll defer to Mark on that, but I don't think that the Prudential Committee is empowered to obligate the district. And this would be obligating the district, even though it's an option.
Yeah, and if it was a non-binding agreement, subject to.
Well, we're not going to resolve that, Jackie. We're going to have to get legal advice.
Okay.
Yeah, so is there a way forward for tonight, do you think, Jim and Fran?
I can contact Mark, and just add to his, what I've already asked him. And do we want to form an executive committee out of this committee to?
It would seem to me DJ, Mark, and Jim would be a good executive committee.
Sure, I'm happy to help in any way I can if you'd like me to.
Yeah, me too.
So real estate, CFO, and a lawyer. That sounds like the
Dream team.
that's the varsity.
My sense is that, for the town to agree to some period of time, they're going to want to see a commitment, from the so-called buyer to do something. So just so people are aware of that. Otherwise, why would they tie the property up for $1? I mean, I think in this case, it would have to, as part of some negotiation, my guess is they're going to want to see that there's, a study, funds are going to get appropriated. Obviously, it'll take some time to do that. So whatever the normal time frame is within the district over the next, I'm guessing it's, I don't know, if it's a couple of months to go through a bit of a process, figure out what that budget needs to be, get it approved. That would have to be part of the agreement as well.
I would assume that we could negotiate that so that it would be steps. In other words, by X, if we have not by X achieved Y, then the option goes away.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Well, from a procedural standpoint, Fran, or Jim, do we need a motion to establish that? I mean, I don't know if there's a competing or an alternative. Are you guys willing to do that, three of you? To be the negotiating sort of subcommittee?
Sure.
I am, yeah.
I'd like
Mark?
Mr. Lynch to be on it also.
I asked Mark if he wanted to do it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that, Adam. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, no, I said, I think Mark, DJ, and Jim ought to form that subcommittee.
And then count on us being active communicators to you of everything we hear.
Do we need a motion for that, Fran?
Sure.
So moved.
I,
Feel free to make a
okay.
motion.
So moved.
I move to establish the negotiated committee comprised of Jim Danhauser, co-chair of the overall committee, Mark Lynch, and GJ McKinnon.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm going to do a roll call for everyone in favor. So it's Jim Danhauser. How do you vote?
Aye.
DJ McKinnon,
Aye.
Adam Zace,
Aye.
Ron Mycock,
Aye.
Jackie Barton,
Absolutely, yes.
Tom Hoppenstadt,
Aye.
Mark Lynch.
Aye.
Thank you. Fran Parks, aye. So, do we want to set a date for our next meeting?
Just before doing that, I circulated to everybody an email I received from Mimi McConnell with public
Oh, yeah.
comment that she wanted to make. You can just have that as part of the record.
Okay.
And for the record, I think this is a great result so that we at least know that we're going to begin the discussion to whether it ends up, Ron, with in new buildings or feasibility studies is anybody's guess. It's just as long as we have some forward motion is really what I was looking for.
And the Water Commission's in full favor of that. We voted unanimously at our last meeting to support this committee, this subcommittee, on any efforts to acquire that property for the protection of water quality and future water treatment needs as.
So, would it be too soon to meet 2 weeks from today, January 20th?
Certainly, I say set up the meeting. If you have to cancel it, you can always cancel it, but, set it up.
Does
That's
everyone
fine.
agree with that?
That works for me.
That works for me.
Okay.
We may have a Water Commission meeting. I'm not sure when that is, and I don't have my calendar in front of me.
Oh, that's right. Those are Wednesdays.
Correct.
Well,
Well, I can check and see if there's a conflict, and if there is, I'll let you know.
Okay.
yeah.
So if there's a conflict, you want to move it to that Thursday of that week? The 21st?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
So we all set? I'll take a motion to accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Have a
Okay.
good
Thank you,
evening.
folks.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
bye.
Fran, what was the alternate date? Water Commission is on the 20th.
It is on the 20th, the 21st.
So the 21st, the alternate day?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So I'll meet the 21st.